Hi, this is Dave Winholtz. I'm a 30-year trial lawyer and work for the firm of the Law Office of Joel Levine, handling residential construction liability cases. And on our docket right now, we have approximately 50 pool cases where the concrete is literally falling apart and the pools are leaking. These cases, we commonly refer to them as ASR cases, which stands for alkali silica reaction, which is the problem with the concrete mix that we've discovered. A lot of people call these cases pool cancer cases because they're very difficult to remedy once the reaction begins. We're here today with John McIntyre of McIntyre and McIntyre Inc. He is one of the preeminent engineers that is studying this problem and coming up with solutions or at least information. I don't know if there is a solution, John, but we'll let you discuss that. But he's a good friend of mine, and he's one of the best experts in the field. And so, with that, John, I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about what is causing this terrible problem with residential pools in our area.
Yeah, hi, I'm John McIntyre. I'm a licensed engineer in the state of Texas. Um, I've been practicing for 45 years or so, and at least 30 to 35 of them in the pool related industry, aquatics. Um, this has been a problem that has started in central Texas in the mid to late the teens. As a result of the EPA passing the Clean Power Act. And that was aimed at reducing carbon emissions in the air, but it had the effect of causing the coal fired power plants to switch from coal to natural gas, which was cleaner burning. The result of that was that fly ash, which is a byproduct of coal burning, disappeared from the market. And there's several reasons that you want fly ash in there. One is that it makes the concrete more watertight. It ultimately makes it stronger, and it also counteracts ASR formation in the mixture. Next slide. The Act passed in about 2016, so it was about 2017 before you started really realizing the shortage in the market. Around in Central Texas, in some areas it takes longer, but in Central Texas, kind of the sweet spot for developing ASR is between about 2 and 4 years. So fast forward to the late 1919s, 2020s, you started getting a few cracks in pools. Now there's other variety of reasons that you can get cracks in pools, but the pool contractors would come out and fix the crack, but a month or two later, you'd have another crack or two or three. They'd fix those, and it just got to where you couldn't keep up. So by the later part of 2020, they were starting to do testing on this to see what was going on. And they found that it was, in fact, ASR, which has been known since the 1930s. It's just that everybody had commonly used fly ash in their mix, so you didn't hear about it, and people had pretty much forgotten about it. So ASR is a chemical reaction between the silica minerals in the aggregates, the rocks and the sand, and the hydroxides in the cement that when they have moisture present, forms a gel that swells from the inside of the concrete and cracks it from the inside out, kind of like freezing a water pipe from the inside. Next slide. And it takes three components to make ASR work. One is the reactive aggregate, and we have a lot of chert around the Central Texas area, which is high in silicon dioxide. That's the reactive mineral. The alkali ions come from the hydrated cement. They're typically sodium or potassium hydroxide. When you have moisture and you don't need wet water, you only need a higher humidity, about 70-80% relative humidity, then this gel starts to form inside the concrete and starts splitting it from within. So if you remove any one of these, you stop the reaction. But obviously, you can't take the cement and the rocks out of concrete. You'll have nothing left. So people try and go after waterproofing to prevent the formation. But that has its problems too. So ASR is not just a problem in Central Texas. It's all over the country. Austin, Central Texas, I should say, is the hot spot right now, where this has happened. You know, the Austin down to San Marcos, Buda, Kyle, north to Round Rock, out to Liberty Hill and Cedar Park, places like that. But there's a concentration on the East Coast around the Washington, D.C., Virginia area, up in the Northeast, as well as along the Western coast, all the way from Seattle down to San Diego. It's scattered around in the Midwest and other parts. The good news is if you live in Montana, North Dakota, or Nevada, you don't have a problem. I have the feeling that's because there's not many pools built there. Next slide. So the telltale signs of ASR is what they call spiderweb, alligator, or map cracking. It's just kind of a random cracking that works its way through the surface of the concrete and looks kind of like these diagrams to the right. If you've got settlement to where the concrete is, the pool is settling to one side or the other. If it's settling in uniform and not cracking, that's deflection. And that means that probably one of your skimmers is going to be out of the water and won't work right. But if it bends and cracks, if the edges settle, it's going to open a crack that's wider at the top. If the ends rise, it's going to open a crack towards the bottom and in the floor. But they tend to be straighter lines, not ruler straight, but basically following a run rather than just random cracking all over the place. So there is a difference between them. Also, in the ASR cracking, if it's advanced enough, you'll get what's called oiling at the edges. And if you see on that lower right picture how it's kind of dark around that vertical crack there, that is very characteristic of ASR. Also, you can get amber gel that actually extrudes out of these cracks, which you can see a little bit around the return inlet at this picture. Next slide. So this is just more of what you look for when you may have ASR. But you can see in all of these pictures, and these were pictures I took at pools that I've looked at around here, you can see the pattern cracking, the random pattern cracking. You can see the amber colored gel starting to ooze out. And you can see that oiling around the edges where it looks like water has kind of seeped under and worked out from the cracks. That in the Austin area, in the last several years, especially during COVID, because a lot of people, rather than going on a vacation, were saying, well, let's stay home and we'll build a pool. There was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 permits just for Austin annually. You put that over a 4-year period, you're at 10,000 pools. Then you add in Kyle, Buda, Round Rock, Hutto, Cedar Park, Liberty Hill, all around here. I mean, you've got a potential source of pool of, 20 to 30,000 pools that could potentially have ASR. Now, that said, they're not all going to have ASR because they didn't all get their aggregates from the same spot and things like that. The aggregates around here that are the most active are the ones along the Colorado River between Austin and Bastrop. There's a whole series of quarries there along the banks of the Colorado. And it stands to reason the same material is washed down over different floods and deposited along the sides of the river there. So it's somewhat the same material. Now, depending where the rain fell and what washed off, different depths of a given quarry can be more or less reactive. Even different areas within the same level can be more or less reactive. And there's about 4 different stages of reactivity, going from non-reactive to very reactive. So if you've got the non-reactive, you're not going to have a problem. It's not going to develop ASR. If you're in the category 1 or 2, you really want something like ASR in there, or a pozzolan, or a alternate cementitious material to counteract ASR. There's several things that can be used. The old Romans used to use volcanic ash. They didn't know why, but it worked very well. If you got a class 3 aggregate, you probably want to go find somewhere else to get your rocks from. But what it looks like when you take a core out, the way you take a petrographic sample is you drill a core, take it out, And this one they have sliced in half and polished it so you can see it well. This is one of the cores I took. And there was a crack at the top, and you can see where at the blue, that's where the plaster is, the inside of the pool, that it was cracked down. Well, it didn't go all the way through, but you can see with a red pen they've taken and they've marked all the little micro cracks in there. That's where all this ASR is started. You can see some of the little white deposits in there. Those are ASR formation around some aggregate that's starting to grow and expand, and what pops this apart. There was also so Dave has had a lot of experience in the lawsuits that he has handled in various suppliers around here that have had issues with that. Dave, you can speak to that.
Thanks, Sean. Yes, the material suppliers that are most often named in the lawsuit are Travis Materials and Texas Materials. And those two groups, at least in the largest lawsuit, supplied their aggregate to a company called Easy Mix. And then Easy Mix was responsible for taking cement from Texas Lehigh and then mixing it together to form the shotcrete. And that, at least those material suppliers, John, are the ones that are in the most often named. There's also a supplier called, I think, Collier Materials as well. But those three, Texas, Travis, and Collier, seem to be the largest named in the cases.
So this is something that people can ask, and we'll get to that at the end a little bit. But if you're contemplating getting a new pool built, ask your contractor where they get their materials from. That's an important question. So as we've kind of touched on, ASR is a slow process. It takes 2 to 5 years to form around here. Here we go. So some of the very common questions I get when I field a lot of phone calls every week on this, is the first thing I ask is, how old is the pool? And if it's less than about 2 years old, there are some that form a little sooner than that, faster. But if your pool's less than about 2 years old, it's unlikely to be ASR. That's not a 0% probability, but it's low probability. It may be something else like shrinkage cracking or deflection like we were talking about earlier. If your pool is older than 5 years from construction, you're on the downhill side of probabilities that ASR is what's causing your problem. It most likely would have shown up before 5 years. So there's that 2 to 4, 5 year slot in there that you want to be careful of, especially if you're looking at a house with a pool that you want to buy and are concerned about ASR. If it's been there 10 years and there's no cracks in it, you don't have to worry about ASR. So there's another issue too, is the type of material that you're using for your pool. The two most common concrete materials are gunite and shotcrete, is what they're commonly called. Gunite is technically dry process shotcrete, where the materials are pushed down the tube dry and water and air is added at the nozzle. So the nozzleman controls the fluidity of the mix, if you will. The wet process shotcrete, and gunite is just sand, cement, and a few additives. Wet process, what's commonly called shotcrete, also has pebbles, up to about 3/8 pebbles for large aggregate. And it's brought in pre-mixed with water in it. So your typical concrete truck that you're used to seeing rolls up to the site, dumps it into the hopper, it's pumped through the hose, and it's pressured with air at the nozzle. But the water is already mixed in. So especially on large pours where you've got commercial pools and you've got quite a bit of concrete, you get more consistency from pour to pour with wet process shotcrete, what's commonly referred to as gunite. Part of the confusion is that technically both gunite and shotcrete are shotcrete, although they are generically called gunite and then shotcrete for the two different types. Unfortunately, some of the pool builders don't know the difference between those. Go back one slide, and they will get the wrong material in there. So part of the reason that wet process shotcrete is more susceptible to ASR is because the rocks have a lot bigger surface area for the chemical reaction to take place. And the rocks have somewhere in the neighborhood of 125 to 150 times the surface area of a sand particle. So it's a much larger reactive area. That's why you see it most of the time in shotcrete. It can occur in gunite, but it's very, very small percentage compared to shotcrete. So how do you control it? Well, as we mentioned, there were the three things. You've got to have the reactive aggregate, the alkalinity from the cement, and water. So you can now get low alkaline cement. That reduces some of the alkalinity for the reaction. You can avoid reactive aggregates. And there's a couple tests we're going to talk about in a minute that you can perform on the aggregate before you ever mix it up that will give you an indication. It's not absolute, but it gives you an indication whether that aggregate is likely to be reactive or not. By using your water judiciously, you want enough water to hydrate the cement, but you don't want excess water. What a lot of the guys around here do, especially in the summertime when it's hot and things evaporate quickly, is they want the material more workable. So they add extra water. That makes the concrete weaker and more porous, which means the water can infiltrate into it, and that can accelerate ASR formation. So if you use things like water-reducing agents and plasticizers to get your workability, but keep your water content to a minimum that you need for hydration, that will help you to make a stronger, tighter mix that is less susceptible to moisture infiltration. And of course, you want to use the additives like fly ash, furnace slag, pozzolans that counteract ASR formation within the mix. So there's a couple of tests that you can use. ACI 506, which is the American Concrete Institute for shotcrete, recommends the ASTM C33, which is the standard for the aggregates. C33 requires reactivity testing for water-exposed installations, which would be like a pool. So if you have that, make sure that's in your pool plans or specifications or contract that the aggregate will conform to ASTM C33. Then that is going to put you a long way down the road towards preventing ASR because you'll know what you're working with. So this is what it says. And this is for the fine aggregate. There's one just like it for the coarse aggregate, which is the rocks. It says it should be concrete subjected to wetting, the aggregates in it, either to wetting, contact with moist ground, should not have materials that are deleterious reactive with the alkalis in the cement, sufficient to cause excessive expansion. That's what ASR is, expansion in the mix. So another thing too is that you can have traces of ASR in your pool. Around the Austin area, most concrete mixtures are going to show some minute amounts of ASR, but it's not enough to be an issue. The problem is when you get more reaction and enough cracking to be deleteriously reactive and form the cracking that disintegrates your product. So the two most commonly used tests are ASTM 1260, and this is where they make a bar of concrete that's about 4 by 4 by, 16, 18 inches long. They put it in a brine solution that's heated up to 100, 110 degrees. So it's an accelerated test. And they do that for 16 days. Then they measure how much that's expanded. If it's expanded by more than 0.4%, which is not very much, it's considered reactive. Now, you're trying to predict something that happens between 2 and 5 years in 16 days. That's a short time. It gives you a lot of false positives on this. So it's not the best, it's about the only test for early on. They also have ASTM C1293, which is a 2-year test. This is much, much more accurate, but who can wait 2 years to have, see if their material is good before they start building with it? And that means you've got to stockpile over 2 years worth of material on a running basis to sell to people if you're going to be, much more sure. The 1260 test is better than nothing, but it is not a guarantee. And some of the pool builders out there saying, we've done an approved tested mixture. That means they've had the aggregate tested by 1260. Some of them are saying this will guarantee that you're not going to get shotcrete. It minimizes the possibility of shotcrete because you've done better than nothing, but it's not an absolute guarantee. So be aware of that. There are some dye tests that you can use for preliminary detection. Again, it's got some limitations to it. Use it as a preliminary test. If it tells you that you've got some ASR, you should go get a petrographic test. That's the gold standard. That's where I was showing you on the core where they cut it and they look at it through an electron microscope and do a full analysis of it. That is the test you want. Unfortunately, that test is fairly expensive. By the time you get said and done doing that, you're going to be spending plus or minus $10,000. Well, the dye test is very quick. You can take a core sample, put it on right on the job, and I think it takes like 10 to 15 minutes to react, something like that. It's not very long. So there's two different colors. One turns yellow, that shows you have the presence of ASR, and if it turns pink, that means you've got advanced ASR formation. And I may have said those colors just backwards, but it's one or the other. The petrographic test, you have to take it to the lab. Depending on their workload, it can be anywhere from 3-4 weeks to a couple of years ago when they were, getting 15, 20 samples a day brought in. There was like a 6 to 8 month backlog in the work.
Sure. John, let me ask you, if I was a consumer and I wanted to do the dye test, is it something I can just simply go on to Amazon and order and do it myself? What is the process? What's the way for a consumer to actually get the dye test done?
There is a place where you can buy it, and you don't have to be a specialist to do it. It costs about $900 for the materials, and that will get you, I think it's 10 to 11 separate tests. So it's going to cost you around $80, $90 per test to do it that way. You've got to have a core drilling bit that you can take a core sample out of your pool. So I would recommend you call a pool contractor. Some of them have the core bits, they can do that. The petrographic test, once you take the core bit, you want a 3-inch by, as much depth as you can get. And Wisjani Engineers, WJE here in town, does petrographic testing. They're one of the few labs in the country that does it. I think the next nearest one is up in Colorado. After that, it's in Michigan or Minnesota, and the next one after that's in Canada. So WJE is the most convenient here to take it to, and they do a very good job. I've taken a lot of samples to them. They will give you a full report with it, with pictures, of the blown up microscopic. Once you've done a petrographic, these are the kind of pictures that you get back, so you can see that here's your big rock, and you can see a crack goes right through the middle of it. Now, this has been put on a slide, so this has been sliced. This concrete has been sliced to about 1 millimeter thick. It's very, very thin. So you can see in that crack, there's some material there. Part of it's washed out. That happens as they're slicing the slide material and polishing it. Some of it falls out. But that whole crack in the native sample was filled up with ASR. At the lower left, you can see the white deposit. That's the ASR gel. You can see where the crack, some of it is dissolved out. You can see on the right hand, there's a little bit starting to form. But you can see the difference in size in the rock, and I pointed to a couple of the sand grains in the upper left. You can see the difference, what a big difference in size there is, and what the surface area for reaction does. So, unfortunately, at this point, there is no cure for ASR. There is one of the chemical companies out in California is working on a treatment that will either arrest or partially retard in-place ASR. But it's still in the testing phases, and it's likely to be at least a year before it's commercially available if it tests out properly. But the main thing right now you can do is remove and replace, which means chipping out the pool and getting rid of it. There are some things that you can do to extend the lifetime of the pool. And a lot of people, of course, are going through the court process, and this is a lengthy process. It's not solved overnight. But there are some coatings that you can do, and all of these the success depends on the severity and advancement of the ASR cracking. There are some flexible coatings you can put on from Miracoat, Laticrete, Sitka, that some of those have been in place 5 years and are still working well. Some of them have failed after a year, year and a half. where there's more severe cracking. Another thing is you can put a vinyl liner inside of an existing pool. These fit very well these days. And if you're going to do that, you want the thicker liner because as these cracks, the pool's expand and contract with temperature and slightly, the cracks will abrade on the vinyl. But you can very likely get anywhere from more than a half dozen up to a dozen years of use out of a vinyl liner. Now, it's not going to look and feel like a concrete pool, but you will have use of the pool, and it's a whole lot cheaper than ripping it out and replacing it. So the best ways to prevent ASR in new construction, number one, never use rebound. This is one that we see fairly often. This is the sand and cement that bounces off the edge when it's first shot. They're supposed to shovel it out of the pool and get rid of it. They try and pack it back into seats and benches and steps. You have to consider that shotcrete is coming out. This is concrete that's being shot out of a nozzle. It's 70 to 80 miles an hour. When it hits that surface, it packs everything together very tightly. Even a big guy like me jumping up and down with his feet on top of the cement cannot compact it as much as that force coming out of the nozzle. So if you don't see a gray ring around your pool when you're done, meaning that they've thrown that rebound out of there, they're not doing it right. That means you need to be, on high alert because you've got some very porous concrete. If you don't use enough reinforcement, most engineers will say you need the 2.2%. That's good for floors and things in houses, which are then covered by, wood, vinyl, carpet, whatever. I mean, you take me to a dozen houses in Austin, I'll find you a dozen cracks or more. So you need a little bit more reinforcement because cracks in a pool shell are not acceptable. So you need higher reinforcement. Concrete's very good in compression. As concrete cures, it shrinks back and tries to open these cracks. Steel's very good in tension and it counteracts that. The steel and concrete tend to expand and contract at the same rate. That's why they're used together. They work so well in tandem. If you've got thicker shells of concrete, the amount of steel you need is a percentage of the concrete present. Thicker walls require more concrete. You also want the concrete, the steel close to the surface you're trying to protect. So if you've got 10 inches or more thickness, you want 2 layers because you want that steel within 2 to 3 inches of the surface. If you get a 12-inch thick wall, a lot of contractors think, I'm giving them a nice big fat strong wall and there's only 1 layer of steel in it. Well, the steel's 6 inches away from the surface. It's not going to prevent that surface from cracking as it cures. Use your additives, fly ash, pozzolans, other things like that. As I mentioned before, use water-reducing admixtures. Don't just add more water. That makes the concrete very porous. You can use glass fiber reinforcing. Fiber mesh is one brand name. It is not a replacement for steel, but it's random and it's throughout the entire mixture rather than just at one layer. It's very good at preventing cracking in concrete. When you're done, use sealers and coatings to waterproof it. A lot of guys are using Zypex because you can mix that in with the mixture. There are coatings you can apply to the surface of the inside of the pool, but if it's an in-ground pool, the outside is still exposed to the dirt. And in the wintertime, when we get a lot of rain and it's cool and evaporation is slow, there's a lot of moisture that seeps in from the outside. Cure your concrete properly. You can double the strength of concrete if you cure it long enough, it's much longer than people would do, but it just shows that curing is very important. If you just cure it for a couple of days versus curing it for a couple of weeks, you can pick up an extra 30 to 40% strength in the concrete and it makes it more water resistant, which is what you're wanting for ASR. Pipes should always be routed outside of the shell and then just poked through at the fittings, like where your return inlets are, your drains, skimmers, things like that. If you put the pipe inside of the shell, especially if you've got like an 8-inch shell thickness, a 2-inch pipe is about 2.5 inches on the outside. You've lost 30 to 40% of your overall thickness. And I've seen pools where you get a nice straight crack running right along in a line with all the return inlets on the sidewall. That means that pipe was run in the wall and it weakened the wall to where it cracked. Seal your penetrations with a water stop. They make flange rings. Remember, concrete shrinks as it cures. So when you've got a pipe coming through the wall, that concrete is trying to shrink back away from it. They make a flange seal that you can put over your pipe and glue to it. that will help seal that so then you don't get leaks through there. Buy a house with a pool. What are the questions as a homeowner you should ask? When was it built? 2 to 5 years is the sweet spot. Earlier than that, you're probably not going to see it. Later than that, your chances are getting very slim that it's going to be ASR. Who is the builder? Have they have a history of problems? Where did they get the materials? Have the aggregates and the cement been tested? Is the pool shotcrete or gunite, and do you know the difference? Make sure that, because that's important. Gunite pools have a very rare instance of ASR formation. Most of the problem pools are shotcrete, wet shotcrete. Who supplied it? As David mentioned, there's several companies around here that are known to have aggregates that cause problems with ASR. You can ask the owners, have they recently had an increase in the water bills, which means that these cracks form and water seeps through and they start losing water? And do you have any of the classic spiderweb cracking or oozing that's going on? So if you think you have a problem, PHTA, which is the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance, is the largest aquatic trade association in North America, maybe in the world. And they have a lot of good information. You can go to phta.org. They've got some frequently asked questions pages that you can access there. You don't have to be a member to access them. Anybody from the public can do that. That gives out additional information, things we discussed today and additional ones. But if you call a pool contractor, the PHTA, as a member, you are required to have continuing education to keep up on topics such as this. They're going to be more knowledgeable than the average pool builder about these issues and tell you what, help guide you to what things you ought to be looking at, what tests you ought to perform, how to get them done. Some of these guys come in and want to do a quick fix. I know one popular solution is to put a fiberglass pool in. I'm not a big fan of that. They tend to delaminate before long and have other problems with them. Again, some of them may last longer, some of them are going to last shorter, but they're not particularly cheap to put in. So if you go to this webpage I've got listed there, that will bring you up to the frequently asked questions, and you can get additional information.
As a lawyer handling these problems, there's a myriad of legal issues that we face in these types of cases. And the most frequent question that I have from consumers is that they've heard of a large case and they think that there may be a class action. And what we have right now is not a class action. It's actually called a multi-district litigation case pending with Judge Jan Seufer in Travis County. And that case was brought on behalf or by the material suppliers that John was mentioning earlier that supplied the aggregate, along with a company called Easy Mix. Right now, there is approximately 115 cases involved, and some of the cases are settling. But recently, the judge just identified five cases that we have that she is going to specially set for trial to give all the participants in the litigation a better idea of what these cases, what the liability for these cases will look like, and more importantly, what the homeowners will collect. And that those cases, those test cases, are real trials that will hopefully take place in February, March, April of next year, and will help get the cases settled. There's also a bankruptcy involving another company that provided the shotcrete called Hot Creek. That case has been pending in the bankruptcy court for about 1 year, and the material supplier is working diligently on trying to come up with a plan to distribute the millions of dollars of insurance money it has to spread out and pay the claims brought not only by the homeowners, but also by the pool companies. So that plan has not been approved, and we're waiting to hear more about that. But who typically gets brought into these cases? The most obvious is the pool companies. Every pool company you can imagine that's done business approximately in the last 5 years in Travis County, from the largest of the large, Premier, Cody, to the mom and pop shops. So you've got just about every pool company, I think, has felt this problem, has felt the anger from their customers, and the vast majority of them are defendants in the case. Obviously, you have the shotcrete companies.
Yeah, I should mention that a lot of these are good pool builders who do good quality work. The problem was that the suppliers, the mixes they had been getting for years that included fly ash, all of a sudden the distributors quit putting fly ash in the mix, and they got caught with a different mixture that they weren't aware of. And then the ASR developed, and on down the road you go. I know I've talked to the head of Cody Pools, and he has mentioned too that all of their problems are in shotcrete pools. They have no ASR cases in their gunite.
Yeah, and I would say that I would slightly disagree with my esteemed colleague that yes, this was a problem from the material side that began, but in almost all my cases, I've seen instances where the application is come into question, the design has come into question, and or the reinforcement steel has come into question. So what we do in these cases is because there are so many different trades that participate, and ultimately the jury is going to be asked to decide who failed to use ordinary care, and if those companies fail to use ordinary care, how much of the responsibility do they bear? You'll see a jury questionnaire at the end that will list the pool companies, the shotcrete companies, the subcontractors, the builders, home builders, as well as the material suppliers. Another frequent question is homeowners insurance. Does homeowners insurance cover these types of losses? You would think that perhaps it would, but I have submitted several homeowners claims. They've all been denied because typically homeowners insurance policies don't protect workmanship. They protect you from fortuitous events, a pipe leaks, a tornado hits your house, not the failure to add fly ash to a mixture that then is put into the pool that breaks down over years. And so that is the unfortunate news with the homeowners policy. The shotcrete manufacturers do have insurance, but given the sheer magnitude of the claims and the volume and the amount of each of the claims, they have limited policy limits. And so Easy Mix has millions of dollars of insurance coverage, but there are also 110 different claims, if not more. Those are just the lawsuits. There are many, many more claims that are asking for payment. So again, who can help pay? The pool builders, like John said, many of them feel victimized, but I would argue that many of them have a role to play in this, but they have policies. Many of those, though, have exclusions about anything, any damage caused by silica. And silica was originally put in as an exclusion in commercial insurance policies after the World Trade Center, where all the first responders basically got sick with silicosis from breathing in the air. I don't think anyone foresaw that silica in a shotcrete mix would eventually cause the type of property damage that we're seeing. However, it is listed as an exclusion in many of the pool builders' insurance policies, and so there's issues with respect to coverage there. With that said, how do we get these cases settled? It's the coalition bringing them all together to try to create a pot of funds or a corpus of funds that help the homeowner have enough money to make the repairs they need. So strategies for the sellers, if you're in this predicament of you've got a pool, maybe you're seeing the spiderweb cracks and some of the other signs that John mentioned earlier, what do you do? I think the first question is, do you test or do you not test? If you test and find out it does have silica or ASR, a reaction, you're going to have to disclose that. So I would contact or have your realtor contact your pool builder, ask for insurance, ask for other claims, a list of subcontractors, and probably the most important is who was the shotcrete supplier. Was it one of the companies I mentioned earlier, Easy Mix or Hotcrete? H&H is also in litigation, but you want to find out what company did that, and then of course you want to find out what the time frame is that the pool was actually constructed. Another possible strategy is you want to talk about transferring the warranty from the pool builder to the new buyer. That could help the new buyer in making any unforeseen claims. Obviously disclose. And then the final, most kind of drastic approach would be remove your pool. I would say this, removing a pool has a domino effect on your decking and landscaping perhaps, but it isn't as expensive depending on access as one might think. So actually, I've had several clients remove their pools. Now flip it over to the buyers. As a buyer, you go into this house, you love the house, you go out and you love the pool, but does the pool have ASR? So you want to ask for all evidence that I mentioned earlier. Are there test reports? Is there documentation? You want to probably hire someone like John or someone in that industry that can actually look and test the pool and see if there's signs of cracking, any evidence, maybe do a dye test. The petrographic test, you could also ask if they would extend the option period to allow you to do any petrographic testing. That testing has gotten much quicker. It's still expensive. It still takes 3 to 4 weeks, but not 3 or 4 months like it did a year or two ago. You want to obviously find out what the estimate would be if you inherit the problem, what it's going to cost you to remove the pool and rebuild it. You would look, if I were you, I would look at social media and the court dockets. They're all online, and see if there's any court filings for the pool builder that built the pool of the house that you're looking to purchase. And if you do have to remove and replace your pool, I'm not a pool expert, I'm not a contractor, but I can tell you from the legal aspect of looking at many estimates, it's running about roughly 2 times the amount of what the original pool cost to install. One of the questions too is what occurs if the seller fails to disclose that they knew there was an ASR problem with their pool. The Texas legislature has a law called the Real Estate Fraud Act, and that act would allow you to sue the seller if they failed to disclose something that was material to you in the purchase of the home, as long as it dealt with the transfer of real estate. And so that act is the basis for most of the litigation when you sue, the buyer sues the seller. That act has got a lot of teeth in it. It allows you to get attorney's fees, triple damages if you can prove it. You can even ask to rescind the deal and have the buyer, you give the money back, or the buyer gives your money back, you give the property back. So that is the main mechanism that lawyers use in looking at these cases when a buyer feels like they've been treated poorly and the disclosures have not been adequately made. You would look for evidence that would suggest that the pool was built at a certain period of time, and you have to talk to the pool maintenance people, talk to witnesses, look at the records, see who knew what and when. If you cannot prove that they knew it was a problem, and this is the biggest defense, yeah, I have ASR, but I never knew it. I never had a diagnosed case of ASR. I don't know what ASR is. If you cannot prove it, then that statute generally allows the winner of that argument or that claim to recoup their attorney's fees. So I had a case some time ago where we went to trial on a real estate fraud case we defended. They couldn't prove my client committed fraud in his disclosures, and so they ended up having to pay him all of his attorney's fees through trial, which amounted to almost $90,000. So it's high stakes poker. It's trying to find information after the fact that sometimes you can never actually prove that they knew they had ASR, they had a problem. So it's tricky and it's risky. So that's the risk involved. So what do we expect? there has been so much media attention to this problem that I don't think that ASR will continue. Just personally, I don't think ASR is going to be a problem for the next several decades, other than the pools that were built that continue to have this problem and aren't replaced. But I don't think we see more and more pools being built with this condition. So over time, the number of affected pools will diminish, litigation will conclude to a large degree, and it's going to be difficult to handle that. I think the real issue is going to be what do people do with their pools once they have a diagnosis? And you'll see a range from, like John was mentioning, liners. I've had clients put in the fiberglass liners. I've had clients dig up the pool and just fill it in. And then, of course, I've had other people say that they have the resources to dig it up and build a pool. So you'll see a lot of backyards, I think, my prediction is you'll see a lot of backyards that had pools that no longer have pools, because that's the easiest and most economical way to remedy the problem, especially if you're planning to market your house and sell it. Barring that, when you go into a transaction like this, you will need your team of experts to help you navigate that. And that's where Mr. McIntyre and his group come into play, as well as others. If any of you need to talk to me or have any questions concerning this, please feel free to reach me at the law office of Joel Levine. My number and email are set forth in the slide. John, thanks again for all your knowledge on ASR. I feel like you're a talking encyclopedia of knowledge, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much for those of you that are watching this, and we look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.